qui tollis peccata mundi, miserere nobis. Agnus Dei, qui tollis peccata mundi, miserere nobis. Agnus Dei, qui tollis peccata mundi, dona nobis pacem.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. I think everybody here gets the Gold Star Award for showing up today. Okay, so today's presentation is going to be on Saint Cristobal. I need Hugo's accent to do this. Cristobal Magallanes, Mexican saint and martyr during the Mexican Revolution. Cristobal, Christopher in English, Magallanes, Yara, was born July 30th, 1869 at Totatiche, Jalisco, Mexico. His parents were Rafael Magallanes Romero and Clara Yara Sanchez. He died May 21st, 1927 at age 57. Nice young age. Canonized May 21st, 2000 by Saint Pope John Paul II. And his feast day, I believe, if I got that right, is May 25th. He was a regular secular priest there, not of any particular religious order. Secular, in this case, does not mean he was like worldly secular. It's just a terminology used if you don't belong to a religious order. His early life, he worked as a shepherd in a poor farming community. And by age 19, he felt called to the priesthood. And he felt like he should be tending human sheep. So he had the call of Christ to Peter to feed my sheep, in a way. He was ordained at the Santa Teresa Temple in Guadalajara in 1899 and ministered as a parish priest for the next few decades in his home village of Totatiche. Again, he was arrested in 1927. So he was actually a very ordinary priest. And during that time, the Mexican Revolution was taking place, and the government had closed the seminary where he studied, and in 1915 he founded a seminary for a dozen seminary students. I'll talk a little bit more about that. But first, the Mexican Revolution, which was really pretty nasty when you look into it. There was really two phases to it. I could sum it up. It was the armed conflict, which took place for about the first 10 years, from 1910 to 1920. And what's known as the revolutionary phase, from the total revolutionary phase was 1910 to 1940. And in the 20s, latter 20s, there was a tremendous persecution against the church there. So in 1917, Venustiano Carranza was elected president, and he created further restrictions on the Roman Catholic Church in Mexico, which when implemented in the late 20s resulted in major violence against the church. And the church at one point tried to fight back, or people or Christians, and it was known as the Cristeria Rebellion. So there were many competing factions and much violence during the revolution. The country was essentially in chaos during that time. And Carranza, when he took power, established the Constitution. And the form of government ultimately settled sort of in a Marxist, socialist / capitalism style of government. So, of course, that was at the time where there was the Bolshevik revolution in Russia, and communism and atheism was really starting to spread its wings throughout the world, and it definitely had its influence on Mexico as well. Henceforth, very atheistic ideologies, which very anti-Christian, anti-Catholic. And the Mexican Constitution created major restrictions on land ownership and educational influence on the Catholic Church. Believe it or not, it wasn't until the early 1990s that the government started to introduce reforms to the Constitution that rolled back the government's power to expropriate property and its restrictions on religious institutions and entities. Right next door to the U.S., too. I'll focus on one piece of their Constitution. When I read it, I just found it kind of shocking, and it may explain a lot of where the mindset was. And stated, private persons may engage in education of all kinds and grades, but as regards elementary, secondary, and normal education, and that of any kind or grade designated for laborers and farm workers, they must previously obtain, in every one case, the express authorization of the public power. Such authorization may be refused or revoked by decisions against which there can be no judicial proceedings or recourse. Religious corporations, ministers of religion, stock companies which exclusively or predominantly engage in educational activities and associations or companies devoted to propagation of any religious creed shall not in any way precipitate in institutions giving elementary, secondary, and normal education and the education for laborers or field workers. The state may in its discretion withdraw at any time the recognition of official validity of studies conducted in private institutions. Private institutions, not even public ones. And of course, elementary education shall be compulsory, and I think that sort of translates as the state is the primary source of education to the children, which, if you really think about that, that is the complete antithesis of what the Catholic Church teaches in the Catechism and in its doctrines, that the parents are the primary educators of the children. And so you can see the state has this huge power grab to control education, which you know what that leads to, trying to build up their little progressive society. So initially written into governmental law, specific prohibitions were declared in regards to organized religion. For example, wearing clerical garb in public outside the church buildings earned a fine of 500 pesos, which was equivalent to about $250 at the time. A priest who criticized the government could be imprisoned for 5 years. Some states enacted oppressive measures, permitted only a single priest to serve the entire Catholic congregation of the state, of a particular state of Mexico. Property was seized, foreign priests were expelled, and monasteries, convents, and religious schools were all closed. In 1924, Plutarco Elias Calles became president. He was noted as saying, "The church is the unique cause of all Mexico's misfortunes." So for him she had to disappear, and an intensification of persecution of the church escalated. So it was already being persecuted, but now it was about to escalate at the time of his policies and his leadership. So from about 1926 to 1929, there was an uprising that started as a result due to the persecution of Catholics. And it started peacefully, but eventually turned more violent, and this was known again as the Cristobal Rebellion. So you can see the Mexican government was vehemently anti-Catholic, and St. Cristobal had to establish a clandestine seminary in 1915. So he was known for his devotion to the Blessed Mother, and he inspired those he came in contact with greater holiness. So during the early stages of the persecution, Cristobal established the seminary at Toratiche, Jalisco, gathering all the displaced seminarians, in one place, as all the other seminaries had been closed throughout the country. So over time, the Mexican government caught on and continued to shut them down, including his clandestine one, and he would just move on and open another. Until finally they wound up having to meet in homes. So he continued to minister to his congregation, although forced to do so in secret. Celebrating Mass secretly was reminiscent of Catholics in England, Japan, or China at various points throughout history. So he had a life of sacrifice, and I'd like to say probably ordinary sacrifice. You know, when I was researching, I couldn't find, there was nothing that really sort of jumped out unique like a lot of the other saints that we study. So while the Mexican government was notably anti-Catholic, he was noted for establishing the clandestine seminary. He authored a newspaper. He founded schools for both adults and children. He assisted the people of his congregation with employment via the organization of carpentry shops and an electric mill. I guess he probably back then that was state-of-the-art, so maybe he was a state-of-the-art priest. He encouraged the cooperation of his congregation with the indigenous peoples of the region, together forming a successful agricultural cooperative. St. Cristobal the mystic. Well, wasn't really known as being a mystic, but he led, a very ordinary life, and was more or less dedicated to the people. So he was really a people person, and maybe he could be put on probably the same level as Mother Teresa, maybe in that respect. I found this interesting. I was not able to find miracles attributed to St. Cristobal. Doesn't mean they're not there, I just was not able to find them. But he died believing Christ as a martyr, and martyrdom is considered a miracle of grace. So he was a devoted Catholic who believed that everyone had a right to worship God. He was also very anti-violence and anti-war. He was a firm believer that you can always find time to help the less fortunate. So it's really simple. You know, how do you like that? It's just, if you want to go directly to heaven, just believe and be a martyr. You can get instant sainthood. As an aside, I want to make a statement. When Catholics are martyred for their faith, I think it's understood as more of a passive on the account of the believer. In other words, just by being, people hate you, and you're the enemy of people without doing anything. So when I say passive, that's what I mean. So often a believer is killed for not denying the faith or for believing the faith. And I want to contrast that to the Muslim religion, which I think is just the opposite. So being a martyr, as a Muslim, the believer actively kills for the faith. He is not associated with denying his beliefs. Although dying for killing is considered an act of martyrdom by participants of their religion, in effect, it really is not true martyrdom. So hopefully you can sort of see the difference there. So I don't really like to consider them as martyrs in the same sense as Christian martyrs, and to equate that to be the same would be a travesty, I think. The government feared the power of the Catholic Church. So during the Revolution, and especially during the time of what was called the Cristero Rebellion, St. Cristobal was subsequently accused of inciting rebellion and arrested, even though he preached nonviolence. Again, he was very nonviolent. He was executed on May 21st, 1927. And I believe earlier I said his feast day was May 25th. It is May 21st. So he was canonized May 21st, 2000 by St. John Paul II. Initially, he was venerated March 7th, 1992, and beatified November 22nd, 1992. Father Cristobal, although it had been made illegal, continued to consecrate and distribute the Eucharist, as well as baptize the faithful into the church. And despite his preaching against violence, he was arrested on his way to a local farm to celebrate Mass. Did not matter that he preached nonviolence. So he was subsequently arrested along with 20 other priests and 3 lay Catholics. Now, they weren't all arrested at the same time with him. This was sort of dispersed around the country there. So prior to his execution, he gave his belongings to his jailers, and interestingly enough, he gave general absolution to his executioners. His last words were, "I die innocent, and ask God that my blood may serve to unite my Mexican brethren." It's a little humor here. So here's what he's famous for: establishing the Mexican government execution fund by supplying many martyrs free of charge. Now, just kidding. So a formal rebellion began, and fighting ensued for approximately 2 years until diplomatic relations and pressure from outside countries, including the United States, led to an uneasy truce between the Cristeros and the Mexican government. In years following the establishment of the truce, however, the government continued to assassinate religious leaders and suspected members of the rebellion, killing approximately 5,500 individuals over a 10-year period. Persecutions of Catholics would not cease until approximately 1940, with the election of a Catholic president. The effects of the war on the church had been profound. Between 1926 and 34, at least 40 priests were killed, where there were 4,500 priests serving the people before the rebellion. In 1934, there were only 334 priests licensed by the government to serve 15 million people in that country. The rest had been eliminated by emigration, expulsion, and assassination. By 1935, 17 states had no priest at all. So while the 25 martyrs canonized by Pope John Paul II died during the Cristobal rebellion, they did not die together. Rather, the deaths were spread throughout the states of Mexico, all for pledging their allegiance to the Lord and continuing to live and preach the good news of Jesus Christ. Of the martyrs, all were priests, with the exception of 3 lay people who served and died along their parish priests. So here's the list of the martyrs here. I have them all listed. I won't read all the names, but I'll just sort of go through what their fate was. The first one, shot to death, firing squad, shot, hanged, shot, tortured, cut throat. Number 9, St. Jose Maria Robles Huerto, parish priest, founded Women's Congregation of Victims for the Eucharistic Heart of Jesus, hanged in 1927. Shot to death. St. Justino Orona Madrigal, parish priest, founded Port Clare Sisters of the Sacred Heart, shot to death in 1928. It's just kind of hard to fathom, doing acts of mercy and being killed for it. St. Luis Baptiste Sainz, parish priest, seminary's spiritual director, shot by firing squad, 1926. Reported to have said prior to his death, "Lord, I want to be a martyr. Though I am your unworthy minister, I want to shed my blood drop by drop for your name." St. Manuel Morales, layman, father of 3, officer of the Catholic Action, shot to death, firing squad, shot to death. St. Pedro de Jesus Maldonado Lucero, parish priest, promoter of nocturnal adoration, blinded and beaten to death in 1937. Poet, hanged 1927. Saint Roman Adame Rosales, parish priest, founded Daughters of Mary of Nocturnal Adoration, shot to death 1927. Shot to death. Saint Salvador Lara Puente, layman, officer of Catholic Action and Religious Liberty League, shot to death, hanged. So it was just brutal. Every martyr realizes how to avoid execution, but refuses to pay the higher price of doing so. A clear conscience was more valuable than a long life. That's very Ignatian. We may be tempted to compromise our faith while telling ourselves that we are simply being realistic, dealing with situations as we find them. Is survival really the ultimate value? Do our concrete daily choices reflect our deepest values? The ones that allow us to tick the way we do? Anyone can imagine in which being a follower of Jesus is easier than the present situation. Saints remind us that our daily choices, especially in adverse circumstances, form the pattern of our lives. As we receive the Eucharist at Mass this morning, let us think and pray of those souls being persecuted in the Middle East as we align ourselves to the suffering and passion of Christ to our brethren over there. I think when you look at today's environment, it's conceivable that the list of Christian martyrs there may be much longer than during the Mexican Revolution. The lives of those who have died for their faith remind us that there exist even today those who are persecuted for what they believe. As the most interesting man in the world said, "Stay thirsty for Christ, my friend." And I'd like to finish with saying, may the peace of God be with you, and in Spanish that would be La paz de Dios esté contigo, mi amigos. God bless you. Thank you.
Agnus Dei, qui tollis peccata mundi, miserere nobis. Agnus Dei, qui tollis peccata mundi, miserere nobis. Agnus Dei, qui tollis peccata